What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In-N-Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right, welcome back, Nightmare Success In-N-Out listeners. This is where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Don't forget to follow, subscribe, share, like, comment, do all that stuff. It helps the show. Okay, folks, I have a story that I was just telling my guests that I've done, I think, 142 of these interviews, but this is one subject that I haven't covered. And it's a dark subject, but it has a successful ending. And that's why I'm so intrigued with this subject matter. But it involves sexual abuse. It involves physical abuse. It involves someone taking the abuser's life. And just to tell you a little bit about David Garlock, who is my guest, he, childhood wasn't easy. His brother and him were raised in a dysfunctional home. His parents got divorced, had custody issues with both parents. There were multiple actions that put them in contact with a man who began to sexually abuse both children. And at 11 years old, David says he lost his innocence and who he really was. He had to create masks so no one could know what was really happening to him. The brothers suffered in silence until the fateful night they decided to take matters into their own hands. The sexual abuse turned into severe physical abuse. This man used to beat the crap out of him daily. And that's when they decided that they were going to take matters into their own hands, the two brothers. And at the age of 20, David was arrested and sentenced to 25 years in prison. He ended up serving 13 years of that prison sentence. And, what he's doing now, it's inspiring just to take, how he's been able to live through that, go through the prison process. He's a huge advocate for anything around reentry, prison education, prison conditions. He's taken it upon himself to try to educate the next generation of criminal justice professionals. He speaks at numerous colleges and universities. He's on a lot of national boards dedicated to criminal justice reform. And he's really just taken his whole experience and used it in a way that is helping others. And I'm always inspired by that. It's an inspiring thing when someone can take their worst moments and then take those moments forward and help other people. I also want to recognize, before we get started, I can't wait to jump into this with David, our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. Who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lots looking for a car? Then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a root canal appointment. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you, negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. The new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. David, welcome in. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. I'm definitely glad that we were able to connect on LinkedIn and then been able to chat some before this conversation.
I always wish we would just record the stuff we had right before we hit the play button, because it's always interesting. And David, I so much appreciate the last time that we were scheduled. I had a mishap with my equipment, and it was way above my pay grade. So I had to get my guy in here to help me, and we rescheduled. So I appreciate you doing that. So we finally got, connected up. So David, your story, like I said, it is not one that is, and I think the other thing about it is I say it's not one that we've covered on this show. It's not one that people talk about a lot in society for all kinds of reasons. And people suffer in silence. And I think it's people like you that really stand out in front of it to give people a voice that are suffering in silence so that they can feel like they're not alone, they're not isolated. But can you take us back? I just gave a little piece of you growing up, but take us back into your world as a kid growing up and what that was like for you.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, it was really about so much dysfunction. If you know anything about this test called ACEs, which is Adverse Childhood Experiences, it's 10 different questions. 5 questions are about the individual themselves, under the age of 18, and 5 are about their conditions, their family conditions. Typically, if you score 4 or more on that, the likelihood of medical conditions, addictions, incarceration go up. My brother and I scored 10 out of 10 on that.
Wow.
This is definitely one of those tests you do not want to score 100% on.
No, that's
you
not
actually want to fail.
Look-
You want to bomb it, like 0 is like what you really want. And I
How old were you when you took that test?
I didn't take it till I got out of prison and was actually in a social work class.
Got it.
And
okay.
that was the first time I really began.
You didn't even
to
know
learn.
about that test until you were tested on that.
Yeah,
really.
exactly.
Yeah.
I didn't know that a lot of things that I experienced were traumatic. Because growing up in the 80s or 90s, getting a severe whooping from your parents, that was normal, but it's traumatic. One of the earliest memories I have is when I was like 5 years old. I was hiding with my brother underneath our grandmother's kitchen table, and we were actually living with our grandmother at this time. And my dad was chasing my sister and mom around with a hacksaw blade, threatening to kill them.
That's not normal.
My grandma had to call the police on her own son. And so there we were watching our dad being arrested.
And you were 5 years old?
I was 5 years old. And he was taken to a psych ward for the weekend and then released. But just the interactions between our parents, I mean, there was so much arguing and fighting all the time. I'm the baby, so I thought my role was to like protect my mom. And so I'd be the one who would always go there and just cuddle with her and try to help her out while she's going through.
And that's so much to think about as a young kid at that age, that you're thinking that I need to protect my mom. I need to do something to help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, everything just progressed and got worse. My dad, he was in Vietnam. He got Agent Orange, got cancer because of Agent Orange, came back, was a alcoholic, and really they had very dysfunctional relationship from the get-go. I don't remember all the details, but when I was 3 years old, my brother was 6 and my sister was 8. We were in South Carolina, and all 3 of us actually went to a foster home. So my brother and I went to one foster home, and my sister went to another. And I was told that we were there for 6 months, and then they got custody back of us. But that just shows the how long this dysfunction occurred. My dad actually kicked my sister out of the house when she was like 12 years old, and I was 7. And with her, though, she went from living in receiving homes or group homes and living on the street. By 17 years old, she had contracted HIV because of prostitution and IV use. And these are just multiple things that we experience. And
did you lose your sister to that?
While I was incarcerated, she passed away because of complications of HIV. And so she was like 35 when she passed away.
Okay.
And then when like you said, my parents got divorced, I was 9 years old, and my mother actually got custody of us for about 4 months. And because she was an unfit mother, lost custody of us. And I mean, during that 4-month period, we probably went to school 8 times. She would wake us up in the morning. She'd be like, "Hey, kids, Joe, David, do you guys want to go to school today?" As an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, what are you going to say?
Right.
No. And so we stayed at home. We were playing the Nintendo all day or watching HBO or just running around the apartment complex.
What did she
And
do? What was your mom doing at that time?
so she was actually the manager of a pizza place in Seattle. So that's
Okay.
where we were living, and it was called Pizza Haven. And she'd always bring pizza and Pepsi home every night. So not
Okay.
going to school every day and eating pizza and
Eating
Pepsi
pizza
every
and
night.
drinking
I mean,
Pepsi.
how can you go wrong? That's like a child's
Right.
dreams come true.
Mm-hmm. So then what progresses here? Because it sounds like that you had everything coming at you. And it sounds like, I mean, I didn't know the early part that you went into a foster home at 3 years old. So that you just had it going on all your life, early life. When does this nightmare begin for you with the abuser? Because if I remember reading, it had to do something maybe when you were in a home care type thing and he was a
So
counselor.
my brother was actually kicked out of the house.
Okay.
A little bit about 2 years after my parents got divorced. He
Okay.
was drinking a lot and got involved with smoking marijuana and stuff. And my uncle and dad told him if they caught him one more time that he was going to be kicked out of the house. And so he was kicked out of the house. And he went through CPS, which is Child Protective Services in Washington. And he went into this group home. And so in this group
That's
home,
what it was, a group home. Yeah.
yeah, in this group home, there was a gentleman that had just gotten out of prison in South Carolina, moved to Washington, and befriended the person running this home so he could have access to young boys. And in this, he began to groom my brother, and then began molesting him. And this went on for a couple months, and then he forced my brother into moving in with him. So after a couple months of that, he takes my brother and they go down to California, where my mom had moved and married a guy that was 14 years younger than her. And he tells my mom and stepdad that they could move up to Washington, live for free in the apartment that he had, and they would have everything provided for them. The only reason that he was doing this was so he could potentially have access to me. So January
Now, did
1st.
you know anything, David, at that
No,
time about your brother and any abuse he was going through?
no, I didn't know anything, because I hadn't talked to him since he had been kicked out of the house.
Okay.
And so they bring my mom and stepdad back up to Washington State. I get a call on January 1st, 1991. My dad and we were getting ready to watch the Rose Bowl. I'm a diehard football fan. I played football for 11 years.
Uh-huh.
So we were getting ready to watch the Rose Bowl. I get a call from my brother, who, as I told you, I hadn't spoken to in a long time. And he's like, hey, you should come over and watch the Rose Bowl with us. And I'm like, I'm here doing this. And we go back and forth for about 30 minutes. And then finally he puts my mom on and I hear her voice. I'm like, okay, I'm coming over. Because my mom and I, just had that relationship. Even though I hadn't seen her in like 2 years, she's mom, I mean, I would do anything to see her and be there. And so I go over. For the first about 3 hours, it's great. I'm seeing my mom. I get a chance to meet my stepdad and just we're having fun. And then this guy is like, okay, let's go play hide and go seek. So we go down into the basement. As an 11-year-old, this is what you do. You play hide and go seek.
Right,
You
right.
play
Nothing
games like
unusual
that,
about that. Right.
And so I go down. I find a closet to hide in, and I thought I found a good spot. And this person found me, and then that's when the abuse began. I wrote a poem about it, and talk about like hands on me in ways it shouldn't be, and just the whole scenario happened. And then walking up those steps, I was in this like state of confusion. I didn't know really what happened, why it happened. And then he pulled me to the side and he told me that if I ever told anybody, that he would kill me and my family.
It's a lot for 11-year-old to hear.
Oh, absolutely. And that's when I began putting these masks on because no one could know anything about me. And I always tell people, that for the next 8 years, I became a really good actor
Hmm.
because no one could know anything about what's going on because I feared that my parents, my brother, my sister, and or I would all be killed. And so when I was at school, I had one mask I wore. When I was at church, I had another mask.
Well, let's talk about the school thing too, David, because you mentioned you played football, and so when you're in that environment and you know everyone around you seems like they're living this normal life, and you have this mask on, and you have these things going on that you're not even sure how to deal with. There's you're at an age where all the teenage stuff's unfamiliar anyway, but that when that happens, that takes it to a whole nother level of it's on steroids of what your mind must think. How was school for you, and how did that environment did that environment help being in school? Did it feel like you were there was an escape for you? Sports was an escape, or did you just feel like all the time that you just didn't fit?
I mean, with the mask, it was always an escape, and I always look back, now, I think that I really used football as a way to get my anger out,
Yeah,
because I could legally hit somebody as hard as I want. And I played fullback and linebacker, so I'm
yeah, those are
constantly
the
hitting
hitting ones.
people
Yeah.
every play, and I
Hmm.
started both ways. So I'm playing a whole game constantly hitting folks. So I always think like, wow, that was one of the ways that I was able to get that aggression and that
Yeah.
rage and that hate out. Um, but yeah, it was always an escape for me.
Well, and it did David did like as you go through, your middle school, your high school, then you have these things that go along with dances and dates. And did you were you involved in all that? Was that something that because of what was going on in this world over here with this abuser, were you taking part in all the things that a teenage boy would do in that world?
To an extent, so there was always limitations on things, and what I could do and where it went, later on, really it when the physical abuse and everything came on later, I mean, I was forced to drop out of school with a semester left my senior year. And then that's when we went to Vegas for a couple months and then went down to Louisiana where my mom and stepdad were. And it actually got a whole lot worse down there. And as you talked about the progression of the physical abuse, there was a key instance where we were all three of us, my brother, myself, and the abuser. We were working at this place called the Morgan City Grill, and it was a diner, and we all were working third shift. And what I would do at times is I would go into the bathroom to use the restroom and count my tips. After I used the restroom, wash my hands, everything. I wasn't, using the restroom and then,
Count the
um,
tips.
and I had this four top, so I don't know if you've ever waited tables. Four top means I had four
Yeah,
customers,
for customers, right?
um, and it was three girls and one guy, and they were from the restaurant down the street that had shut down. This was like 2 or 3 in the morning on Saturday morning. So I'm over there waiting, flirting with the girls, because that's what waiters do. You flirt, you get bigger tips. So after I talk with them, I go into the restroom, because I'm gonna count my tips, and the person that abused us followed me in there, shut the door, grabbed me by the throat, and just pushed me against the paper towel dispenser. And all I remember is that. And next thing I know is he's punching me to bring me back to consciousness.
Mm.
And it was instances like that, where I knew that he would kill us at any point, at any time. And
Did your mom know anything about this because of the abuse, and then it got physical? Was there other times you were, beat up and questions were asked, or was it just something that she turned a blind eye to?
So I didn't know what she thought she knew or anything like that until we were actually in the county jail. Um, when it was a couple months after we were arrested. We got a letter from my mom, and
Mm-hmm.
she said that one of her friends that she worked with had found on the internet that my brother and I were arrested. And so she wrote us. Probably 2 months after we had been writing, she's like, "Hey, can you guys tell me everything that happened?" So we sat down one Friday. We spent the whole weekend writing this letter. It was a 30-page letter front and back. And
Mm.
I have pretty tiny writing. So just think about uh
Like a small book.
yeah, like a book, 30 pages front and back. And we told her everything that happened from when my brother was abused first to the night of the murder.
Mm-hmm.
And she wrote back a couple months later. And when I actually got the letter at mail call, it I couldn't understand the writing because it wasn't my mom's writing.
Mm.
My stepdad actually addressed the letter and sent it to us. And he wrote a little note, and he said that our mom passed away of a massive heart attack when she was writing us.
Oh my gosh.
And in the letter that she wrote me, she said that she thought things were going on, but she is so sorry that she never asked and she never pursued or pushed anything. And but also in that letter, she talked about how proud she was that I was working on getting my GED and other things while I was in the county jail. And so that was really hard because for about a year and a half, here I am blaming myself for her death,
Mm.
saying if we didn't write that letter, she wouldn't have passed away. She wouldn't have died. But then I had to just realize that it was her time, you
Yeah.
know.
Wow, that's deep, David. I mean, that's really something. And you know, the fact that you weren't able to, after writing that letter, create a different type of conversation and relationship going forward. It's just, it's a lot. It's a lot, you know. Well, take me back to because, you know, you went through this for years. Um, and walk us into the night that you guys decided this is it. This is gonna, you took matters into your own hand. What in your mind, what was going through your mind at that time?
Well, I mean, it wasn't really like a decision where we're like, okay, this is it. This is it. It was just a combination of everything building up. We both
Mm-hmm.
had been drinking that night, and in psychology, they talk about seeing red, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the thought process about just all kinds of rage and hatred, and that's really what had happened. Everything had built up, and that's what led to the murder, you know. And I don't go a day without regretting that decision and regretting that we took somebody's life. At that moment, you know, it was what we felt had to be done, you know, to escape, you know. But I always tell people, you know, because there's a lot of people who have experienced what I have who
Mm-hmm.
wish that they could do what I have, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell them, I'm like, no, you don't, you know, because you've experienced a lot of trauma up
Mm-hmm.
until this point. But I have to live with the thought every day that I took somebody's life.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, thinking about the idea that it was done to be free. But in all actuality, I created another prison. And for the next 4 months, I lived in that prison. I lived every day with the fact that I had taken somebody's life, and I couldn't tell anybody about it because if I told anybody, I would be arrested and
Mm-hmm.
charged with murder. And so here it is. I'm
Well, how did that go down, David? Because like you take his life. I don't know how you took his life. Um, you guys walk out of there, and then what happens?
So, I mean, we just went into survival mode and we buried his body because that was we didn't have a car, we didn't have anything like that. So,
Was it like
we
a gunshot or something that you did?
I actually really don't talk about how we took the person's life
Okay,
because that's a
more trauma.
yeah, and yeah, we just decided at the moment, it was just like survival. Like, okay, what are we gonna do now? We
Right.
need to dispose of this body. And so we just buried him in the backyard. And 4 months later, they found the body. Um, and during that 4 month period, my life was just about drugs and alcohol, because I had to cope. And um, my mentality was like sex, drugs, and rock and roll because there was this
Hmm.
aspect of like, wow, I'm free. I'm 19 years old and I actually
Hmm.
get to live
Feel
like
like a
a
normal person.
teenager now,
Yeah.
like all these things that I have not experienced for years. Now I get to experience. And yeah, it was just a lot of wild times. I was doing any type of drugs. I was huffing Freon. I mean,
That's a
that
lot.
like that tells you that I was doing
Yeah.
anything and everything just to stay out of it. Now, I worked during the day. I was a waiter, so I knew that I had to work because if I didn't work, I wasn't going to have the money for the drugs later that night.
Were you with your brother in this time period, this 4 month time period?
So my brother was there for about a week and a half, and then him and a waitress that we worked with, they decided to leave, and so
Okay.
they left. And when I was actually arrested, I was the first person that was arrested, and my brother was arrested about a month and a half later in Florida. And the night that I was arrested was October 29th, 1999. So almost 25 years ago
Was that just a
was
knock on the door, David? Like
I was actually at work.
you were at work.
I was working at Shoney's, and the detectives came and they're like, "Hey, do you want to? Can you come down for some questioning?" So I go down. They start asking questions, and that first night I partially confessed to what had happened, and then they booked me on a murder charge, and here I am, 20 years old. And this is in Alabama. The murder happened in Alabama.
Yeah.
Alabama is one of those states that loves to give out the death penalty.
Hmm.
So I'm thinking this whole weekend, this first weekend that I'm in the county jail, I'm in this booking cell that was cold as can be. I don't have enough clothing. And I'm just crying myself to sleep. I'm just thinking, like, wait, what's going to happen? Am I going to get the death penalty? Am I going to get life
Hmm.
without
It's a lot to
parole?
think about.
Yeah. And I had just turned 20 like 3 weeks previously.
Yeah.
So here I am, 20 years old, thinking I'm going to get
You're
the
gonna get the
death
death
penalty.
penalty. I'm curious, David. Did you when they arrested you or they were talking to you and you were half confessing what was happening? Did you lead them through what had happened to you?
Yeah, I did that. And then also November 1st, when I went back for more questioning, they had come and got me at 8 a.m., took me to the city jail, and they put me in an interrogation room by myself for 7 hours.
Mm.
I'm just sitting there by myself. They did give me 2 packs of cigarettes and a little lighter. I only had to use that lighter one time, and all 2 packs of cigarettes were gone in like 30 minutes because I was just chain smoking because I hadn't smoked all weekend. And
And you're nervous?
again, here I'm stressed out.
Yeah.
I'm sitting in a city jail looking
Thinking you
at a
might be
murder
getting
charge.
a death sentence for what you're dealing with.
Yeah, and
So, did you
so
have an attorney, or what? How did that all work out for you? I mean, it sounds like right now you're just being drug in and out, telling your story. Was there a time where you said, "Hey, I need some representation here," or what? What happened?
I mean, being green to the situation, I didn't ask for an attorney, anything like that. They did offer me one, um, but I didn't know the system like I do now.
Right.
I mean, none of us do.
Right.
And so I finally called the detective back in, after the 7 hours, where I was thinking about the abuse, thinking about the murder, thinking about everything that had transpired in my life. And I confess, I told him everything that happened, what happened to my brother and me, what happened with the murder, what happened with everything involved,
Mm-hmm.
and that was this big weight taken off my chest, because this is the first time that I ever told anybody about the abuse, the first time I'd ever told anybody about the murder. And I was
Mm.
actually able to begin to take off these masks. I no
Mm.
longer had to hide anymore.
That's fascinating.
Um, and they brought the video camera in, recorded my testimony. The detective took me down to the cop car, and we were headed back to the county jail. And I look at him, I'm like, am I going to get the death penalty? Am I going to get life without parole? And he turns to me, he's like, do you believe in God? I'm like, am I going to get the death penalty or life without parole? He's like, do you believe in God? I'm like, okay, am I going to get the death penalty or life without parole? And he's like, do you believe in God? And I'm like, yeah, I believe in God. And he's like, you need to seek him now. And that conversation changed the whole trajectory of my life, because I got back to the county jail, asked for a Bible. They gave me a little New Testament Bible, and I just started reading, and I surrendered my life to God. And, that was the second thing that helped me take the mask off. And my brother was arrested a week and a half later in Florida, and he confessed to the crime, and our testimonies were 100% alike. And you have to realize, 1999, you don't have cell phones, we're not talking all the time. And so they knew that, we were telling the truth, because we hadn't been in contact since a week after the murder.
Right. So, I just think the whole thing is so incredible how you got through this, David, because it's like a movie. So you get through the confession. What are the next steps that happen in the justice system? How do you get to the point
the
where
legal system,
the legal system? And I saw that in your writing. You talk about the reform of the criminal legal system, not the criminal justice system, which I think is a good point, a really good point, because those who have gone through that find that it's the criminal legal system.
Yeah, I mean,
justice isn't always sought after.
Yeah, Brian Stevenson, who is the founder of Equal Justice Initiative, world-renowned lawyer, he actually worked with my brother and me and helped us get out of prison and help both of us with pardons later on in our life and story. But he always says, the criminal legal system treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, here we are, we're two kids that they gave me a $50,000 bail.
Yeah.
Which was like $1 million or $10 million bail, because I didn't have family and we weren't from Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't have anybody pay $5,000 for me to get me out of prison,
mm-hmm.
to get me out of jail. I went before the judge at my preliminary hearing and found out then that I was only being charged with murder. Mm-hmm. So in Alabama, murder, the sentence variation or range is 10 years to 99 to life with the possibility of parole. So that was this big relief, knowing that they weren't going to give me the death penalty or weren't going to give me life without parole. So that was definitely big relief. Then they gave me a court-appointed lawyer. So I love public defenders. I have a lot of public defenders that are friends. The work that they do is incredible. They're overworked and underpaid. We need to provide more money for these individuals who have a passion for fighting for people and giving them the best.
I agree.
Defense.
I kind of take it to like teachers. My youngest daughter is a teacher, and public defenders, they do all this incredible, passionate work, but they don't really get paid.
Yeah. And in Alabama, there's only 5 counties that have public defenders. So we were in a county where they didn't. So we were given a defense attorney who has to do a certain amount of cases of this court appointed every year. And my court appointed lawyer and my brothers were pitiful. They really didn't want to do anything for us. In Alabama, they have this thing called youthful offender status. So if you're under 21 years old and you commit an offense, you can apply for this status, and they can, if it's granted, the most time that they can give you is 3 years. Do you know who didn't tell me about the youthful offender status?
Your attorney.
My attorney. Don't you think that's something he should
have known and should have suggested? Exactly.
But he didn't. The only way I found out about it is my brother and I were looking in law books, thinking about what we were charged with, thinking about our offense. It actually fell under justifiable homicide, which is a Class C felony, not murder, which is a Class A felony that they charged us with. But our lawyer didn't want to fight anything like that. There were so many different things that they did wrong. They only came with us with one deal. My court appointed lawyer, he was saying, hey, they're only going to offer you one deal, 25 years. Then he's like, hey, if you have to serve all 25 years, you'll still be a young 45 when you get out.
That's got to be an unbelievable statement when you're not 25 years old. You're 20 years old. You haven't even lived that long.
I was 21 years old when he told me that.
Yeah.
And this is something that, like, when I speak in universities, I'll ask, like, anybody 21, and I'll go up and I'll ask them, I'm like, how would you react if your lawyer told you that,
25
you'll
years.
Be a young 45, like, come on, what? I don't even know what 30 looks like, or 40, but 45, exactly. It's like, wow. But we took the plea deal, because again, we were agreeing this to the system. Mm-hmm. We didn't know that we should have pushed back. We didn't know that they would have come with another offer potentially,
right.
And so there's a lot of things that we didn't do to fight for ourselves because we didn't know.
Mm-hmm. How did, what were your thoughts going into prison? You're a 21-year-old kid, you're a young kid, you just got sent to prison with a lot of time. How were you thinking? Like, what was going through your mind walking in?
Well, I was glad to get out of the county jail, because our county jail, we had no TVs, no radio, no newspaper, no real connection to the outside world. So it was going to provide that. But even in the county jail, I told myself that I was going to do the time instead of letting the time do me. So my mentality was,
you already had that strategy in your mind.
Yeah, because I got my GED in the county jail, and I was looking forward to other opportunities like that to continue to better myself, because I was telling myself, even if I have to do all 25 years, I want to be a better David Garlock when I get out of prison than when I went into prison. And I was able to get a certificate in drafting there through the chapel at one prison. We had a master's or theology degree, so I was able to get a master's of theology through an unaccredited school. Everything I was doing was to better myself. Went through behavior modification programs. The last 3 years that I served, I did some of the hardest work that I did while I was incarcerated, but also some of the most beneficial. I did hospice work. It was so hard taking care of these men, knowing that they were going to take their last breaths in prison, that they were never going to be able to experience freedom, and that the Department of Corrections didn't care about them. All they cared about is that you were going to serve your sentence. If you were given a life without parole sentence or a life sentence, they were just going to be there until you took your last breath. And it was disheartening because there was no humanity, No,
and I can't imagine, you and I have both been in prison. To die in prison, it would be the ultimate freedom loss of not being on the outside to die.
Yeah, and just the idea that these individuals could never commit another offense, but the Department of Corrections is like, nope, you're gonna die in prison. It was
Mm-hmm.
just so inhumane, and just watching the amount of people that died, and just seeing now, in some of the work that I do here in Pennsylvania, we're doing work around geriatric medical parole and
Mm-hmm.
parole eligibility for people with life without parole.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking about that 40% of people in prison right now are 55 and older.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my colleagues, Dr. Megan Novisky at Cleveland State University, always makes a comment that you're not watching these news. You're not watching the 11 o'clock news where there's big crime wave of
A
people
bunch of 70 year
in
olds.
wheelchairs and walkers committing these robberies and stuff. It's because the criminal legal system has doled out all these
really long sentences.
Yeah, and
I had Elizabeth Shatswell on 2 or 3 episodes ago, and she's a real advocate for everything to do with healthcare and mostly for older people who are serving time in prison, because she was in prison for murder. It was complicated, but it was her. She became a real educated person on the subject, and you guys ought to meet up, because her passion for that has gone, further than where she's at right now. I'm curious too, David, during your time in there and becoming like what you're talking, I can just kind of tell how you're talking about become a passion of yours. When was it that you started learning that you might be able to get out earlier than the 25 years?
well, I mean, in Alabama, you're always eligible for parole.
Mm-hmm.
Except now, the parole board in Alabama is really horrible now. So I'm glad that we had decent parole boards when both my brother and I went up. And in 2008, Brian Stevenson, Equal Justice Initiative, started working with us. And they initially started looking at our case and realized that there was multiple reasons that we could appeal, but Alabama has a limited time frame as far as appeals.
Mm-hmm.
So they just changed the focus onto helping both of us out with parole. And really because of the different things that I had accomplished while I was incarcerated, I was able to make parole.
Did you serve time with your brother?
So we were at one prison together for about a year. When we first went down we were in the same cell in the county jail for like 8 months.
Yeah.
But when we went to prison, Alabama had a rule that family members couldn't be at the same prison, but they changed that later on while we were serving. And so we were able to serve a year together, and it was really fun. My brother's not really into sports, but he was playing some soccer. So I played basketball, volleyball, softball. I did everything. I've always been an athlete. And so there were times just to spend time, I'd play soccer with them. Most of the times we were on opposite teams, but there was one time I remember where we were on the same team, and I had got the ball, and so he and I were on this breakout, and I have it. I passed it to him. He passes back to me, and I score. And people are like, "It's a Garlock to Garlock to Garlock score!" And so it was rather
in prison
and cute. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Hey,
but it's funny though. You bring up the thing about sports in prison. I think it's one of the things that kind of lets you have an escape. You feel like you're up maybe on the outside because you feel normal. You're playing these sports, and you forget for a while that you're in prison just because you're in the throes of playing a sport that makes you feel a certain way when you're on the outside. So I get why guys do that. The only thing you don't want to do in prison is get hurt. So many guys that break a wrist or ankle. It was just like and then some guys that were getting close to the door, they wouldn't get released because of that.
So playing basketball in prison, I busted my eye open, busted the back of my head, lost a tooth, separated shoulder, messed up both ankles. But I would always get back out there, and people will call me like,
that's a different sport in prison basketball, because I played basketball in high school, and the basketball in prison, that's a different sport in there.
Oh yeah, definitely is.
Full contact.
I got called my nickname playing ball was white chocolate, because I played point and I could dish the ball,
Uh-huh.
So,
They like that. Everybody likes the ball.
oh
Pass
yeah.
to them. You know what? I forgot. I said at the beginning of this that we had not had a subject matter on like this, but now that I think about it, David, we had in my first season Stacy Lannert, and it was a well-known story in Missouri. She and her sister were molested, sexually abused by their father, and she killed her father. And she got a life sentence. Then she got her sentence commuted. Then she got pardoned. And now she is, what made me think of what triggered my mind is she now represents people for the state of Missouri and has a seat at the table on these types of issues. So Stacy Lannert, I didn't forget about you. You have an incredible, and anybody who wants to listen to that one, that's in the first season. But, um, you know, when you were talking about people helping you, how did you find them, David, or how did they find you?
So one of my friends in prison was actually a client of Brian Stevenson, and then that's how they connected us.
Okay. So you find, you're going to this parole hearing, and I can't imagine.
No,
No,
we don't go to parole hearings in Alabama.
you don't. You're
No,
not attending.
no,
Somebody attends for you.
yes.
Well, let me know how that feels.
That is really horrible, because you can't go in front of the board yourself. You can't.
So you just sit and wait.
Yeah, you sit and wait for you wait to call your family or friends or lawyer to find out what happens later.
Wow.
And sometimes you won't know for a couple days too. So
how can they make a judgment or an evaluation on someone if they don't see them and talk to them?
Well, a lot of it is based on
case manager, write-ups, and all that kind of stuff.
Write-ups, what you've done while you're incarcerated. You can send all your certificates, stuff like that. You do see an institutional parole officer. So a parole officer will come interview you.
Okay.
Then they put a report to the parole board. And they're potentially, let me say potentially, quotation marks, trying to work on things where the incarcerated population can at least do a Zoom with the parole board. But that's the thing. I mean, you're not there to speak on your behalf. And here's the kicker too. Almost every parole, especially now with how corrupt and messed up the Alabama parole board and pardon board is now, you're constantly having a victim's advocate there, and you're having somebody there from the attorney general. And 99.9% of the time, they're protesting whoever's coming up for prison. They don't care what you've done in prison. They always go back to what offense you did. So you're not being judged on
rehabilitation
what you've done and who you are now. You're being judged on that person 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's so wrong.
Well, the other thing too, David, that we talked about before we got on was the amount of loss that you had in your family while you were in prison. How did you deal with that? I mean, your mom dies before you ever go into prison, but you were in custody. And then you lost 3 or 4 people while you were in prison. How did you work through that? Because that's I was with 2 or 3 people that lost people that were very close to them. One was a son. Murphy lost his mom. That is so deep and dark for that to happen while you're in prison and you can't go out and be with your family. How did you work through that?
I mean, a lot of that was my faith, my grandma passed away in 2008. My dad passed away in 2009, and my sister passed away in 2010. And like you said, my mom passed away in 2000 when we were in the county jail.
Yeah.
And it was always, just that faith, and relying and trusting in God. When I found out that my dad was in the hospital, it was a Friday afternoon, and I heard my name over the loudspeaker saying, "David Garlock, report to the chapel." That is something you do not want to hear, because 95% of the time it's going to be someone sick, somebody's ill, somebody's dead. Mm-hmm. So I go in. I had a really good relationship with the chaplain, so he told me to sit down and we had this conversation, and he told me that they had gotten a call that my dad was in a coma out in California. And when I was a kid, when I was probably 12 years old, we found out that my dad had cancer due to Agent Orange, and that he was going to die every 6 months for like 2 or 3 years, so we didn't believe it after that. So, I mean, it was something that was expected that was going to happen.
Yeah.
But it was still, like you said, I mean, here I am incarcerated. I can't do anything about it.
No.
And so I walked back to the dorm, and one of my friends is standing outside by the phones, and he's like, "Hey, David, how are you doing?" And he sees that, I had been crying and stuff. And what was really incredible about this experience is like 3 days earlier, he had lost his nephew. And so I was there able to comfort him and talk with him and console him. And here he is 3 days later being able to do the same thing to me. And so I walk into the dorm and they call count time. So in Alabama, when they do count time, you have to sit down on your bed and just wait for them to come in and count. And so there I sit down and I just start praying. I'm like, God, I just need some comfort now. And open up my Bible and I go to the story of David and Bathsheba and their son being sick, and David fasting and praying, and when he realized that the child was dead, he got up and cleaned himself and was ready to get back to normal stuff. And his workers were like, "Wait, what are you doing? You should be mourning." He's like, "Well, when the child was still alive, I was praying and I knew that God could heal him. But now that he's passed away, I know that I can't go, he can't come back, but I can go to him." And so that just provided so much comfort because I knew that, God could heal him if he wanted to, but that I would see him again.
Wow. That's heavy, deep stuff, but it makes sense, David. So let's talk about the stuff with you. You get to the parole hearing. You find out. How do you find out?
So I found out with a phone call when I called Brian Stevenson in February 2013, and then they said that I made parole and I got paperwork that I was going to be released on April 1st, 2013.
April Fool's Day.
April Fool's Day, exactly. And there were actually two officers that wanted to joke around with me, and they told me that morning, they're like, "Garlock, your paperwork hasn't come in. You can't go home." I'm like, "Y'all know I love to joke around and have fun, but my freedom is not something I want to joke around about, y'all. Let's go." And then finally they're like, "Okay, get out of here."
What was it like? What were you walking out to?
I walked out to a car because people from Equal Justice Initiative were there to pick me up.
Okay.
But so both my brother and I went through their reentry program, where they assisted us with a studio apartment, and then just helped us with working on resumes, different things like that to obtain employment. It took me a month and a half to get my first job. Arby's wouldn't hire me, Burger King, McDonald's, none of the fast food places would even give me an interview because I checked that box. My first job I had for 1 day and 2 hours. And it's not because I did anything wrong. It's because they never asked me about my background when I was first interviewed. And the second day, the general manager had an issue with me having a felony and had an issue with me having a violent offense. And she tried to blame it on the company for the reason that she was firing me, because she said, "Oh, we have a company policy that says we can't have violent people working here," which 2 weeks later I found out from the kitchen manager that that was false and that was her issue. And so that's something I always talk about, when I speak in universities, that, people who have backgrounds, we not only have to deal with companies and their biases, but we have to deal with individuals,
actual people,
and
right?
That makes it so much harder, especially with what type of offense people have.
Well, and it is true, and not all offenses are the same, but they're all put in the same bucket. And it is one. I think we're one of the last of our breed to be legally discriminated against. It's legal not to rent to you. It's legal not to give a job to you because of who you are. And there's a lot of things out there on reentry that people doing good work. And I think there's like 27 million plus of people, ex felons, and I think one of the things that we've got to do as being who we are is I think we're obligated as we go through our experience, both you and I, David, we're both trying to do what we can do to bring a better and bigger voice to the cause because we know what we went through and what the system is. But, it's about getting those people out of silos and building bridges so that people can understand. I know I just interviewed Tara Simmons, who's up in Washington. She's a state rep. And she's been able to accomplish so much she went to prison. She was a drug addict. She got out. She went to law school. The bar wouldn't let her sit. She went to the Supreme Court. She won. She broke that barrier. She then was able to run for a state representative. She got in. She then started educating people about things that were barriers that the legislators didn't know that she did know. And by her having a seat at the table, they've completely in the state of Washington changed so many laws for reentry for people getting out because she knows it. And, that's what I see, David, about your story is you have so many different layers of things that that you're using your story to help people in a way that someone that hasn't experienced it can't really do the same thing that you're doing. But I want to jump ahead of that because we left at you weren't getting a job at McDonald's and Arby's. How did you step forward, David?
I mean, it was later that week after I got fired. I went into this restaurant and the manager there name was Bud Skinner, and he's like, "Hey, let's do an interview." So I did an interview. He's like, "Hey, you have a 13 and a half year gap on your resume. Can you tell me about it?" And I'm thinking right then, it's like, I have to make this decision.
Yeah.
Am I going to tell the truth or am I going to lie?
Yeah.
So I decided to tell the truth. I told him everything that transpired about the abuse, the murder, what I did while I was incarcerated, and my goals and my objectives. He's like, "Hey, because you were open and honest, I'm going to give you a job.
I love that.
I'm going to start you off at $9 an hour as a dishwasher." He's like, "I have never hired anybody who's been formerly incarcerated." And I was just like blown away. And I was a dishwasher for 3 days and got promoted to doing soup, salads, appetizers, and desserts. And I was there for 6 months before I transferred my parole from Alabama to Pennsylvania. And I always tell people that Bud Skinner was probably my worst boss ever. Because he is one of those type A personalities that is,
I thought you were going to say he's your best because he gave you this job. You say he's your worst boss ever.
No, I mean, I love that aspect, but I'm talking about he was cursing me. He cursed me out 3 days a week.
Yeah.
Just because he wanted to. I'm doing everything right, but that's his personality. And I'm not talking about like one of these things where he's a couple feet away.
Yeah.
He's like 2 inches from my face. His face is red,
like that.
And he's spitting in my face.
Yeah.
I wish I had like an umbrella to like stop it. But then I had to tell myself, I'm like, treat him like a corrections officer, because if I don't, I'm going to get fired. So I'm just standing there. Yes, sir. No, sir. Thank
Good
you,
point.
sir.
Yeah.
But something I'll never forget is the last day I went to Jubilee Seafood to get my check and everything. He called me to his office. He handed me his check and he put his arms out to give me a hug. And he gave me this big bear hug. I'm like, why haven't you been doing this the whole 6 months? You've been cursing me out, but now you want to give me this big old hug.
Yeah.
And then he told me something I'll never forget. And he passed away about 2 years ago. He told me, he's like, "David, you had a crap story dealt to you," but he used different adjectives, fill in the blank, you know. He's like, "You could easily feel and go around being the victim, but you're not. You know, you're going out there and you're achieving and earning what you want. You don't want people to hand you something."
Yeah. That's big. And it's true. There's a big difference between being a victim and a survivor. And one gives you, takes away all your strength and curls you up in a fetal position. The second one gives you strength and you walk differently and you walk with pride. How did you get to Pennsylvania?
So I was able to. So in 2008, when Brian Stevenson started working with me, he started telling me about Eastern University, which is a Christian college outside of Philadelphia, where he got his undergrad. And so
Okay.
they started writing me, and I was definitely intrigued with the university and potentially going up there. And
Mm-hmm.
then um, I got the booklet about Eastern and what they offer, and I saw that they had a prison ministry and a street ministry, and that really solidified it. Like, yeah, that's where I want to go, because you have a lot of Christian schools or churches that say they believe in faith and have faith, but they're not putting feet to their faith.
Mm-hmm. Not
But
walking it.
seeing
Right.
that they had a prison ministry and a street ministry, I was like, okay, they're living
That
out the
fits.
gospel.
Yeah.
And so we were writing. When I got out, I had applied, and I applied to do two different universities. I applied to Alabama State University, which is HBCU there in Montgomery, Alabama, and also Eastern University. And the doors open for me to go up to Eastern. And what's incredible about it is I actually had to get my parole transferred from Alabama to
It's not
Pennsylvania.
easy.
That usually takes 6 months to a year, if not longer.
Mm-hmm.
It happened in 3 weeks, 4 days before school started. And I'm just like, I was amazed, and just like, my wife always tells me, she's like, your life is rainbows and horseshoes and butterflies. I was like, hey.
Let's talk about her. How did that come about?
So we met in 2015, in April 2015. We were in the doctor's office. We met. We started dating May 17th, 2015. Got engaged July 25th, 2015, and married August 15th, 2015. So
Huh.
within like a 3 month period, we went from dating to marriage, and
Yeah.
we've been
You found out
married
you really liked her.
almost
She
nine
likes you.
years.
Yeah. 9 years now.
Yeah, and we have a almost 4-year-old son who is just the epitome of what a second chance looks like. And
Oh,
if I never made parole in 2013, I would still be in prison until October 27,
wow.
2024.
Isn't that something to think about? Wow.
And I always dreamt about a family. I always dreamt about having children.
Yeah.
And every day, just seeing him is just the epitome of what a second chance looks like.
That's so cool, David. So let's talk about, because you speak, you're on boards, you're in the ministry. Uh, I feel like you're working your passion, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely incredible. I mean, what's really interesting about it is when I went into Eastern University, my goal was to major in social work and open up a home for kids and teens to get them off the streets, because
Mm-hmm.
I had an experience when I was a teenager living on the streets in Seattle. But there was like some tweaks and turns, and so my major is actually urban studies, focusing on criminal justice and social welfare. So it's urban studies, criminal justice, and social work all combined. And I've been involved in reentry work. I worked at a Christian reentry home in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, called New
Mm-hmm.
Person Ministries, and this ministry primarily works with people who have committed sexual offenses. So people are always like,
No,
excuse
when we
me.
first talked, David, that was one of the most shocking things about your story,
Yeah.
because you're dealing with people who have committed sexual offenses. I mean, you could deal with a lot of other people with reentry, but that in particular really caught my attention.
Yeah, and people are always like, how in the world can you do this? You should hate this population. You
Yeah.
should believe that they need to be buried underneath the prison and
Right.
never be released. But, I always tell people it's about grace, it's about mercy, it's about forgiveness. And Brian Stevenson always says, you're not as bad as worse than you've ever done. If I
Mm.
want people not to look at me as a murderer, how can I not look at somebody else as whatever offense?
Mm-hmm.
In the movement today, there's a lot of work being done about using person first language, so getting away from terms like convict, felon, murder, things like that, and so using terms that humanize. So formerly incarcerated person who committed a murder, person who committed a sexual offense, because you want to separate the act that somebody did and the actual person.
I like that. I want to ask you a question here, but before I do, I want to recognize the White Collar Support Group. Nightmare Success Podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group, the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice system. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group, and I can tell you this is a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you've made it through to the other side, this is a great space for you. You can join us on Zoom Mondays, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific. For information, go to prisonist.org. That's prisonist.org. Start here. So all this going on, David, all this going on. And I mean, I can't imagine what 13 years coming out and reentering society, you know, how much had changed. Well, in fact, what was the biggest thing for you that had changed?
I always tell people, because that's a question people ask, you know, and I would tell them that one of the craziest experiences was couple probably 30 minutes after I was out, you know, we went to Walmart, and because I had to get hygiene, you know, and just being able to choose so many things.
Sensory overload.
I mean, 100 blue toothbrushes. Which one do I want? You know, 100 different toothpaste, 100 different deodorants. And so at one point I just started just grabbing stuff, and I'm like, I don't care, you know. But then
and all the colors too, you know.
Oh yeah.
You live in a drab world where everybody wears the same, you know, and anything you buy from commissary, it's gray or whatever. It's weird too when you get out and there's just, it's like a color boom. It's like you were living in black and white and your world turns into color.
Yeah, definitely. And so then the folks are like, hey, we have a 3-hour ride. I'm like, okay, let me go use the restroom. So I go into the restroom. I walk up to the urinal. I'd use the restroom, and I'm like looking. I'm like, where's the lever? I'm like, I can't see it. And then I back up, and the toilet flushes. I was like, what? I was like, where have you been all my life? You know?
It's
and
magic.
It's just like, same thing with the sink, you know? So things like that really blew my mind. And then like texting folks, people were using all this lingo like SMH. I'm like, what's that? They're like shaking my head. I'm like, okay, why? They're like, no, silly. I was like, hey, type everything out to me. You know, I don't know y'all's lingo, you know?
So David, after I mean, your story is like a movie, and maybe it will be a movie, but living through what you've lived through and where you are now, what do you think for the listeners out there is your biggest takeaway through all this you've experienced?
My biggest takeaway is, I always go back to, there's a passage in 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4. It says, God is God of all comforts and tender mercies, and he comforts us so we can comfort others. And I've been asked numerous times, like, David, if you could change anything in your life, what would it be? And I'm like, nothing. Because if you take anything away from my life, I'm not who I am. I don't have the passion I have, and I'm not doing the work I'm doing. And here I am. I get to take my scars, and I get to show my scars to people who have scabs, and let them know that healing is possible, and let them know that, yes, it's going to be a journey, but you can get there. You know, healing is possible, you know, and your past is just the thing that educates you. What you do today, what you do tomorrow, that's what defines you.
That's such a great takeaway. You're giving people real hope, and hope can be a powerful thing, because if you take hope away, it takes away a lot of, it might be the only thing that people have, but if you can give people hope, it can get them to the point where they can, you know, take the courage to step forward. And I think that's what you're doing, David, when you're sharing your story and sharing your experience. And I think it's powerful. Talking about how do we get a hold of you? What's the best way to get a hold of David?
I mean, I'm on Twitter and Facebook, David Lee Garlock. As you said, I do a lot of speaking. I travel the country. So I have a website, davidlgarlock.com. And you can also reach me at dgarlockspeaker@gmail.com if you want me to come to your university or any other stuff. I speak at conferences. I speak at churches. I'll speak anywhere you want me to speak.
I can only imagine how powerful that is, because I've just heard your story here today. You would be a great speaker for any event. I want to give a shout out to Homestead Financial. Lets me use this nice little podcast studio here. And anybody who's looking for their home mortgage leads, go to Greg Avdiev. He knows his stuff. Anybody looking for a book out there, still reading? I've got mine at Nightmare Success. You can go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I do really appreciate everybody with the follows, the likes, the subscriptions, comments. And if you got time, I know it's a hassle, but leave a review on Apple. That just puts the show on steroids. It just does. I don't know what it is. If you want to know more about me, it's BrentCassidy.com. That's with a TY, not a DY. We spell it wrong. And as I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. David Garlock, what an incredible story. What an incredible man. Thank you so much for being here today, sharing your story.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Nightmare Success, in and out.